What if the future of human civilization wasn't here on Earth? What if, within your lifetime, the moon becomes a place where people live, work, and even raise families? As you go about your day, could you imagine that far above you humans are building a home in the sky? The plans are already in motion. By 2030, we could be standing on the brink of a new era, not just visiting the moon but living there. But the real question is, what does that mean for us down here? How will life on Earth change when our species becomes truly multiplanetary? So how do you actually prepare to build a base on the moon, a place where no one's ever stayed for more than a few days? Well, you don't just send people first. That would be a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, the moon had to meet its first permanent residents long before humans even stepped foot there. And who were those first residents? Robots. Now imagine this. It's 2032, and while we're down here on Earth, NASA, SpaceX, and a few international partners have been quietly sending fleets of highly advanced robotic rovers to the moon. Their mission? To prepare the surface for what's coming next, humans. But what does that actually mean? Are they out there planting flags or building skyscrapers? Not quite. These robots are digging in. They're testing the lunar soil, called regolith, to understand exactly what it's made of and how we can use it. See, one of the biggest challenges is that we can't just bring building materials from Earth. It's way too expensive to ship everything across hundreds of thousands of miles of space. So these robots are tasked with finding local resources we can use to build the base. They're scoping out areas where water ice might be trapped in shadowy craters near the moon's poles. Water, as it turns out, is key, not just for drinking but for turning into oxygen and even fuel. And then, there's the solar power. Robots are setting up early solar arrays, slowly but surely creating a source of energy for the future base. It's like they're laying the foundation for a whole new frontier, and they're doing it without us even being there, but there's a twist. You'd think we could just sit here on Earth, send commands to these machines, and everything would go smoothly, right? Not exactly. The moon isn't a short hop away, it's 384,000 kilometers away. And that comes with a frustrating communication delay. Every time we send a command to one of these robots, it takes a few seconds to get there. And then we have to wait for it to do something and send the results back. Doesn't sound like much, but when you're trying to control robots that are performing delicate tasks, those seconds start to add up fast. So we had to get creative. These rovers were designed to be more independent, like a team of construction workers who could follow a rough plan but make on-the-fly decisions when things got tricky. They had to learn to think for themselves, at least a little, because no one on Earth could babysit them every second. It's almost like giving the moon its own workforce. Robots that can handle the unexpected twists and challenges of building a base in one of the most hostile environments we've ever tried to conquer. By 2033, these robotic pioneers had already made some incredible progress. They had scouted the surface, analyzed resources, and begun carving out the very first footprint of what would soon become a home for humans. They were doing the heavy lifting, literally, and all from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. But of course, even though these machines were smart and capable, they couldn't do it all. Eventually, there would have to be boots on the ground, human boots. And as we'll see, the first steps toward building a permanent home on the moon didn't come easy for those who took them. By 2034, everything was in place. The robots had done their job, the moon's surface was prepped, and the world was ready for the next big step. It was time to send people back to the moon, not for a quick visit, but to stay. Can you imagine what that moment must have been like? The anticipation, the pressure, knowing that every detail had to be perfect, that every calculation could mean the difference between success and disaster. So, when the first crew lifted off from Earth, there was this sense of history repeating itself. But this time, the stakes were higher. We weren't just planting a flag and leaving. This time, we were building something lasting. The spacecraft, sleek, advanced, a product of years of technological evolution, made its way through the void, heading toward a home that didn't exist yet. And then, after days of travel, they touched down. The first human landing for the purpose of creating a permanent settlement on the moon. Just imagine, you're one of those astronauts looking out at the barren gray landscape knowing that this place is about to become your home for the next several months. There's no atmosphere, No air, no sound, just the stark, quiet desolation of the lunar surface. It must have been surreal, stepping out of the spacecraft, feeling that slight gravity tug, just enough to keep you on the ground, but still lighter than anything on Earth. What's the first thing they do? Well, survival comes first. The crew immediately set to work, setting up temporary inflatable habitats that had been sent ahead of them. These were like the ultimate space tents, fully equipped, self-sustaining, and designed to protect them from the harsh environment. And let's not forget about the radiation. The moon doesn't have the same kind of protective magnetic field that Earth does, so living there long-term means constantly managing radiation exposure. The crew couldn't just hang out in the open. They had to create shielding, using layers of material, sometimes even burying parts of their habitat under the lunar regolith to block harmful rays. Inside the habitat, life wasn't exactly luxurious. Imagine a space no bigger than your average living room, and that's where they'd be eating, sleeping, working, everything. The air was recycled, the water purified, every resource used as efficiently as possible. And yet, despite the cramped conditions, the isolation, and the challenges, there was this excitement. These astronauts were living on the moon. They were making history, every day, every minute. But it wasn't just about surviving, they had a mission, and it was a race against time. Their stay wasn't permanent yet. They were there to pave the way for something bigger, a base that could support future crews for longer and longer periods, and that meant getting to work right away. They started unpacking the more advanced habitat modules, larger structures that could be connected and expanded over time. These weren't inflatable. They were solid, prefabricated buildings designed to withstand the moon's harsh conditions. And the coolest part? Some of these modules were built using 3D printing technology, which allowed them to create structures out of lunar soil, the very material that surrounded them. Of course, not everything went smoothly. The moon isn't exactly forgiving. Temperatures on the surface can swing between extremes, boiling hot during the day and freezing cold at night. Equipment sometimes malfunctioned in the cold, and dust, lunar dust, was everywhere, clinging to everything, making even the simplest tasks harder. But that's the thing about space exploration. Every challenge is a new opportunity to learn, to adapt, and to keep pushing forward. And while the crew worked on expanding their temporary shelter, they also had to figure out how to live there. This wasn't like an expedition to the International Space Station where supplies could be sent up every few months. The moon is far more remote. They needed to find ways to be as self-sufficient as possible. Growing food was still a distant goal, but they were already experimenting with water recycling and oxygen generation, using the resources around them to sustain life. At night, or what passes for night on the moon, the crew would look up at the black sky knowing that Earth was just a small blue dot in the distance. It's strange to think that for them, home wasn't Earth anymore. For the time being, home was the moon. So, the crew is on the moon, they've got their temporary habitat set up, and they've started experimenting with ways to survive long-term. But now comes the real challenge: turning this temporary outpost into a permanent base. It's one thing to live on the moon for a few weeks or months. It's another thing entirely to create a settlement that could support human life for years. This is where things get interesting. The goal? To build a structure that can handle everything the moon throws at it: extreme temperatures, solar radiation, micrometeorites, and the never-ending lunar dust. And they had to do all of this with limited supplies, using as much of the moon's natural resources as possible. It sounds impossible, right? But this is where technology truly shines. One of the biggest breakthroughs came with three-dimensional printing. We're not talking about the kind of three-dimensional printers people use at home to make toys or gadgets. This is on a completely different level. The idea was to take lunar regolith, the dust and soil covering the moon's surface, and use it as the raw material to print solid structures. Think about that for a second. Instead of shipping huge amounts of construction materials from Earth, which would cost billions, they figured out how to use what was already there. It's like building a house out of the ground you're standing on. The process wasn't easy though. First, they had to figure out how to convert that fine, powdery regolith into something usable. The answer was to mix it with a binding agent and then print it layer by layer, much like how a three-dimensional printer on Earth works. But this printer wasn't sitting in someone's garage. It was a massive, specialized machine sent to the moon ahead of the crew. The first tests were promising, but they had to keep tweaking the process, making adjustments as they learned more about the conditions on the lunar surface. The result? Strong, durable, airtight buildings, structures that could withstand the harsh lunar environment. These weren't just shelters, they were the foundation of a future lunar city. And the best part? These three-dimensional printed structures provided much better radiation protection than the inflatable habitats the crew had been living in. Over time, they printed more and more modules, linking them together to form a network of connected habitats. Living spaces, labs, storage facilities, and even greenhouses for future experiments in growing food. But it wasn't all about construction. Life support systems were the next critical step. They needed to create a closed-loop system where nothing went to waste. That meant recycling air, water, and, well, everything else. It's not exactly glamorous, but on the moon, efficiency is everything. You can't afford to throw anything away because resupplying from Earth is rare and expensive. Every drop of water is precious, and every breath of air has to be carefully monitored and maintained. They had systems in place to scrub carbon dioxide from the air, recycle water from waste, and generate oxygen through electrolysis, breaking apart water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. It's like living in the most high-tech, self-sustaining eco-home you can imagine, only it's on the moon. Of course, as the base grew, so did the need for power. Relying solely on solar panels was tricky because of the moon's long day-night cycle, about 14 Earth days of sunlight, followed by 14 days of darkness. During the lunar night, temperatures dropped to around minus 170 degrees Celsius. To survive these extremes, the base needed a more reliable power source. That's where small modular nuclear reactors came into play. These compact reactors provided a steady supply of energy, powering life support systems, communication arrays, and the massive three-dimensional printers working around the clock. And then, there was the problem of communication. Keeping in touch with Earth wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. The moon's distance means there's a delay, only a few seconds, but enough to make real-time communication tricky. Plus, the base needed to stay connected to the rest of the world 24/7, which wasn't easy when you're dealing with the moon's rotation and long periods out of direct sight from Earth. The solution? A network of satellites orbiting the moon, creating a reliable communication system that could relay signals between the base and mission control back on Earth. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best solution at the time, and it worked. As the base expanded, it started to feel less like a temporary outpost and more like a real home. Sure, it was still small, and the crew faced constant challenges, but it was working. They were proving that living on the moon wasn't just possible, it was sustainable. And every step forward brought new discoveries. They found that the regolith itself, the very material they were using to build their base, contained valuable resources. Elements like helium-3, which could one day be used as a fuel for fusion reactors. Imagine that, the moon, not just a home, but a source of energy for the future. But there was still so much to do. They hadn't even scratched the surface of what was possible. The next big leap would be finding a way to produce food on the moon. Because if we can figure out how to grow crops in that harsh environment, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities, not just for the moon, but for Mars and beyond. By 2036, the moon base had grown from a few temporary shelters into something much more substantial. But even with all the progress, there was one critical question that still hung over the whole mission. How do you create a truly sustainable presence on the moon? I mean, it's one thing to build structures, but what about the basic necessities? Food, water, air. These aren't luxuries, they're life itself. And on the moon, you can't exactly rely on a grocery store down the street or the local water company. Everything had to be sourced, recycled, or created right there on the lunar surface. Let's start with water, because without water, nothing else works. Sure, we had sent some supplies from Earth, but that was never going to be a long-term solution. The key was finding water on the moon itself, and thankfully we did. You see, in the early robotic missions, those scouts found something pretty incredible. Frozen water trapped in the permanently shadowed craters near the moon's poles. It's strange to think about, isn't it? Ice on the moon. But there it was, hidden in the darkness. just waiting to be mined. Now, mining water in a place with no atmosphere, no weather, and extreme temperatures, well, that's easier said than done. The ice is frozen solid, mixed with regolith, and locked away in these deep, cold craters. But we developed ways to extract it using specialized robots designed to drill into the frozen ground, melt the ice, and purify the water. It was a slow process at first, but the breakthrough came when we realized this wasn't just about drinking water. Water on the moon could be split into hydrogen and oxygen, which not only gives us air to breathe, but also creates rocket fuel. So in a way, the moon wasn't just supporting life, it was helping fuel the very spacecraft that would take us further into space. Water wasn't just survival, it was a resource with huge potential. But as exciting as that was, it still wasn't enough. Water was just one piece of the puzzle. The next big challenge? Food. You can't exactly plant a garden on the lunar surface, so the team had to get creative. They started by experimenting with hydroponics, growing plants without soil, using nutrient-rich water instead. In the early years, it was small-scale stuff. Tiny gardens growing lettuce, herbs, maybe some tomatoes. But these experiments were laying the groundwork for something much bigger. The idea was to eventually develop large-scale food production systems that could support an entire crew without needing constant resupply missions from Earth. And it wasn't just about growing food for survival. There was a psychological benefit too. Imagine being stuck on the moon, looking out at the gray, lifeless landscape every day. Having a small green garden inside the habitat, it gave the crew a little piece of Earth, something alive, something they could nurture. That sense of normalcy, even in the middle of the most extreme conditions, can't be overstated. It was a reminder of home, a connection to the life they had left behind. Of course, not every experiment was a success. Some crops failed in the low gravity, others didn't respond well to the artificial lighting conditions, but each failure was a learning experience. Over time, they refined the process, figuring out which plants thrived in the moon's unique environment and how to maximize yields with minimal resources. And this wasn't just an exercise in feeding astronauts on the moon, it was research that could change how we think about agriculture back on Earth too. If we can grow food sustainably in one of the most inhospitable places imaginable, what could we do in deserts or in areas devastated by climate change? Then there was air. Breathing isn't exactly optional, right? The base had life support systems, of course, recycling air and scrubbing out the carbon dioxide. But relying entirely on mechanical systems wasn't ideal, especially when they had to last for months, even years, without breaking down. So the next logical step was to create an oxygen generation system using the moon's own resources. And that's where things got really cool. It turns out, lunar regolith, the dusty soil that covers the moon, is rich in oxygen. About 40 to 45% of the regolith is oxygen, bound up in minerals like silica and metal oxides. The challenge was finding a way to extract it, and that's exactly what they did. Using a process called molten salt electrolysis, scientists figured out how to break apart the chemical bonds in the regolith and release pure oxygen. So not only were they using the moon's soil to build the base, but they were also turning it into breathable air. It's one of those moments where you realize just how clever and adaptable human ingenuity can be. We were literally turning dust into life. But even with water, food, and air under control, there was another pressing issue: waste. On Earth, we throw things away, flush them down the drain, and they disappear. On the moon, nothing disappears. Every drop of water, every bit of waste had to be reused and recycled. They developed closed-loop systems that could break down waste into its basic components, purify it, and turn it back into something useful. It was like living in a zero-waste society. Everything had value. Nothing was wasted. So here we are, just a few years into this grand experiment, and already we've figured out how to make the moon a place where humans can live, maybe even thrive. But it's still early days. The goal isn't just to survive, it's to create a self-sustaining system that doesn't rely on Earth at all. Imagine that, a base on the moon, completely independent, able to support life indefinitely, drawing everything it needs from the lunar surface. It sounds like science fiction, but step by step we're making it a reality. Now let's take a moment to step back from all the technical achievements and look at something just as vital: the social and cultural life of the moon base. We often talk about the science and technology involved in space exploration, but what about the people living there? What was it like to call the moon home? After all, the biggest challenge isn't just the harsh environment, it's the psychological and social dynamics of living in such an isolated place. Imagine being one of the few humans on the moon, far away from family and friends. Sure, you're making history, but that doesn't erase the reality of isolation. The crew had to figure out how to maintain their mental well-being. They implemented routines, a little bit like you'd find on a small naval ship or research station in Antarctica. They set schedules for work, exercise, and downtime. And during their off hours, they found creative ways to bond. Movie nights became a thing. They'd project films onto the walls of their habitat just to escape into another world for a while. Can you imagine watching your favorite Earth movies while looking out at the stark, gray lunar landscape through the porthole? It sounds surreal, but it was important. They needed to feel connected to their past, to what made them human, even while living in a completely alien environment. Then there was communication with Earth. The crew relied on regular video calls with family and friends back home. But remember that communication delay? There would always be a lag, about 1.28 seconds for signals to travel between Earth and the moon. So conversations became a little different. They had to learn to wait for responses, making it a sort of back-and-forth dance. And while that was a challenge, it also led to deeper conversations, as they learned to truly listen, to savor each exchange. Every call became a lifeline, a moment of connection in an otherwise isolated existence. And of course, there were the celebrations. Imagine celebrating holidays and birthdays on the moon. The crew would go all out, decorating their habitat with whatever they could find, bringing a piece of Earth to their new home. For instance, they might bake a cake from the supplies they had, albeit a bit crumbly and a lot different than what you'd find back on Earth. But it didn't matter. The point was the spirit of the occasion, the shared joy of celebrating life together. As time passed, a unique culture began to form within the base. They shared stories, created traditions, and even developed their own slang. They became a family of sorts, with bonds that transcended their differences. Each crew member brought their own backgrounds, experiences, and cultures, leading to a rich tapestry of perspectives that shaped daily life. They learned from one another, adapting ideas and practices from their varied heritages. But there was more. They began to think about how to preserve Earth's cultures while embracing their new lunar identity. Art became a vital outlet, a way to express emotions and experiences in a place where everything was stark and utilitarian. The crew members took to drawing, painting, and even crafting music with what little they had. They'd set up makeshift art galleries in their habitats, sharing their creations with one another. It became a way to express the beauty and struggle of their unique experiences. And let's not forget the role of science. Every experiment conducted on the moon had implications beyond just survival. They were contributing to our understanding of life in space. The crew members collaborated not just as scientists but as creators, innovators, and explorers. They documented their experiences, sharing findings, ideas, and dreams with the world. This was more than a mission. It was a chapter in the ongoing human story, one that spoke to resilience and adaptability. The social dynamics weren't without their challenges, of course. Confined spaces and constant interaction can lead to friction, even among the closest of friends. But through team-building exercises, open communication, and a commitment to supporting one another, they navigated those challenges. Conflict resolution became an essential skill. They learned to address issues before they escalated, often using humor to lighten the mood. And as the years passed, they started to plan for the future. It wasn't just about surviving or even thriving, it was about laying the groundwork for the next generation of lunar inhabitants. How would they raise children on the moon? What kind of education would they offer? These questions began to take shape as they envisioned a long-term presence on the lunar surface. Imagine the first lunar school. Children learning about Earth's history and culture while gazing out at the moon's desolate beauty. The crew understood that education would be vital for future generations. They wanted to ensure that those who lived on the moon would have a rich, diverse education, one that incorporated both Earth's traditions and the new lunar experiences they would cultivate. So, by 2038, life on the moon had evolved into something extraordinary. It was no longer just a place of scientific exploration, it had become a thriving community, rich in culture, creativity, and shared humanity. The moon base was a beacon of hope and a symbol of what humanity could achieve when we dared to dream big. As life on the moon base continued to flourish, the crew became not just inhabitants but pioneers of scientific discovery. Each day brought new experiments, fresh challenges, and unexpected revelations, and while the world back on Earth was captivated by the daily updates, what was happening on the lunar surface was far more profound than just a few tweets and headlines. This was a frontier of knowledge, and every small success had the potential to change everything. One of the most exciting areas of research was in astrobiology, the study of life beyond Earth. The moon might seem barren, but it holds clues that could unlock secrets about life in the universe. The crew began conducting experiments to understand how organisms respond to lunar conditions. They brought with them various strains of bacteria and fungi, monitoring their growth and adaptation in low gravity and high radiation levels. Surprisingly, many of these microorganisms thrived, demonstrating resilience that could inspire future life support systems for long-duration missions. But the real eye-opener came when they discovered that some of these microorganisms could be used to convert lunar regolith into usable materials. Imagine using tiny organisms to turn the moon's soil into building blocks for habitats or even food. It was a game-changer, highlighting the potential for biotechnological solutions to some of the most pressing challenges of living in space. And it wasn't just about living organisms. The crew also delved into the geology of the moon. Each mission involved collecting samples of regolith and rock, bringing them back to the lab for analysis. The moon is a time capsule, holding records of our solar system's history. By studying its composition, the scientists could gain insights into the formation of the Earth, the moon, and even the planets beyond. One discovery that stood out was the presence of volatile elements, things like hydrogen and carbon, that were previously thought to be rare on the moon. These elements are essential for creating fuel and supporting life. The idea that they could harness these resources to create a self-sustaining ecosystem on the moon was thrilling. It suggested that the moon wasn't just a place to visit, it could become a stepping stone for deeper exploration into the solar system. But the crew didn't stop there. They also engaged in lunar science that had direct implications for Earth. For instance, they monitored cosmic radiation and solar flares, contributing to our understanding of space weather. This data is crucial not just for astronauts venturing beyond low Earth orbit, but for protecting our technology and infrastructure on Earth. Every experiment conducted on the moon could potentially safeguard lives and systems on our home planet. And let's not forget the unique opportunities for collaboration. Scientists from around the globe watched closely, sharing their expertise and findings. This lunar base became a hub for international cooperation, with researchers sending questions, proposing experiments, and analyzing results from afar. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve together, transcending borders in the name of knowledge and exploration. By 2040, the work being done on the moon had drawn attention beyond the scientific community. Artists, writers, and thinkers began to reflect on the significance of these discoveries. There were documentaries, novels, and even films inspired by the achievements of the lunar base. It sparked conversations about humanity's place in the universe, our responsibility to explore, and the ethical implications of colonizing other worlds. In classrooms back on Earth, students were captivated by the stories emerging from the moon. The crew members became role models for the next generation of explorers, inspiring kids to dream big and pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. They started asking questions. Could there be life on Mars? What else could we learn from our neighboring planets? The moon was no longer just a celestial body, It was a launchpad for imagination. But amid all the excitement, there were still challenges to overcome. The lunar base was still in its infancy, and maintaining a long-term human presence required continuous innovation. Each challenge was an opportunity to grow, to adapt, and to improve. The crew learned that failure was just as valuable as success. They developed a culture of experimentation. If something didn't work, they didn't see it as a setback, but as a stepping stone toward the next big breakthrough. And as they looked toward the future, one question lingered in the air. What's next? With the moon as a foundation, could humanity finally set its sights on Mars? The lessons learned on the lunar surface could inform the next giant leap into the cosmos. The technologies, the strategies, the very spirit of exploration, it was all about to be tested on a much grander scale. In those moments of quiet reflection, as they gazed out at the stark beauty of the lunar landscape, the crew members understood that they were part of something much larger than themselves. They were laying the groundwork for humanity's future among the stars, and the possibilities were limitless. As we look toward 2040 and beyond, it becomes clear that the moon base is just the beginning of a much larger journey. This isn't merely about surviving on the lunar surface, it's about laying the foundation for permanent human settlements beyond our home planet. Picture it, lunar cities bustling with life, innovation, and discovery. It's an ambitious vision, but one that feels increasingly possible as we learn more about living and thriving on the moon. The initial lunar base has proven that humans can adapt and innovate in extreme environments. As we refine our technologies and understanding of lunar resources, the prospect of expanding into larger communities becomes more tangible. We could see multi-module habitats connected by networks of tunnels or even aerial transit systems. Imagine a city that not only houses astronauts but scientists, engineers, artists, and families. A vibrant community contributing to humanity's shared goal of exploring the cosmos. But the question is, how do we get there? One crucial element will be international collaboration. Just as nations came together to build the International Space Station, we'll need that same spirit of unity to establish a lunar city. Sharing knowledge, resources, and expertise across borders will amplify our efforts. It's about pooling our strengths and working towards a common goal, the exploration of the stars. And what about the moon's role in all of this? The moon is much more than a destination. It serves as a launch pad for deeper space exploration. With its lower gravity and proximity to Earth, it's an ideal testing ground for technologies we'll need on Mars and beyond. Every advancement made on the lunar surface has implications for future missions. We can experiment with life support systems, sustainable energy sources, and even propulsion technologies, all in preparation for the greater challenges that lie ahead. Now let's talk about Mars. The moon could act as a vital way station for missions to the Red Planet. Think about it, launching from the moon means we're only 3 days away from Earth, not months. Crews could spend extended periods on the moon, conducting research, refining their strategies, and prepping for the journey to Mars. The resources we harvest on the moon, water, minerals, and perhaps even oxygen, could all support missions to Mars, reducing the amount we need to send from Earth. This could revolutionize our approach to interplanetary exploration. And as we look even further out, the search for habitable planets becomes increasingly feasible. The technologies we develop for the moon and Mars will pave the way for exploring distant worlds. Imagine sending out probes to exoplanets, looking for signs of life and maybe even discovering new worlds that could support human life. The dream of becoming a multiplanetary species is on the horizon. But with this grand vision comes responsibility. How do we protect these celestial bodies? How do we ensure we're not repeating the mistakes of our past here on Earth? The principles of sustainability, respect for other worlds, and international cooperation must guide us as we venture into the cosmos. So, what does the future hold? Perhaps one day we'll look back at this lunar base and see it as the birthplace of a new era. An era where humanity isn't bound to a single planet, but reaches for the stars. An era where we live not just on Earth but on the moon, Mars, and perhaps even beyond. The possibilities are staggering. From lunar agriculture that could one day feed millions, to new scientific discoveries that change our understanding of life in the universe, every step we take is a leap toward a future full of promise. The moon isn't just a destination, it's a stepping stone into the great unknown, a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and our unwavering desire to explore. As we stand on the brink of this new frontier, we must embrace the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. With every ounce of curiosity and every measure of determination, we can turn the dream of lunar colonization into a vibrant reality. This is just the beginning of our adventure. The universe is waiting, and it's time to explore it together.